Hello. So this video is going to be a performance review of Arthur Miller's The Crucible, performed at Shakespeare's Globe, directed by Ola Ince. It's a classic play, right? It's a modern classic in sort of broad, maybe, sense of, well, not even that broad a sense of modern, but it's a play from 1953, I believe, the 1950s at any rate. And it's regarded as one of the most important plays of the 20th century. It is a story, it's an anti-McCarthyite story, most directly, because Miller writes it in immediate response to the sort of anti-communist witch hunts and ideological tyranny of Joseph McCarthy in the United States in the 1950s. It's anti-authoritarian. It deals with these sort of questions of what it means for a system in which injustice is institutionalized, in which religious fanaticism is weaponized against the innocent, and how easy it is for those with personal agendas or desires or grudges or whatever it is to weaponize systems that see themselves as ultimately righteous. I saw it at the Globe. It's really, really, really good production of The Crucible. I would expect nothing less from the Globe. They tend to do very good work. But it's a play that I have significant problems with, which is not the fault of the Globe. If anything, it's the fault of Arthur Miller. But, yeah. So the play is about the struggles and challenges faced by John Proctor, who is a moderately well-to-do but very respectable farmer in Salem Village in Massachusetts Bay Colony in the 1690s. This is a time very much of Puritanism. It is a time in which religion theocratically dominates the community, in which political or temporal power is deeply intertwined with religious and sort of eternal conceptions of power. John is drawn basically into this widening witch hunt, literal witch hunt. They are actually looking for witches, because his former servant and former lover, Abigail Williams, who is much younger than he is, it's worth bearing in mind, is discovered with the daughter. So she's the niece of Reverend Paris. She's discovered with his daughter Betty and a number of the other younger girls from the town, discovered by the Reverend Paris himself, dancing in the woods and doing these sort of rituals and things like this. And so there's sort of immediate talk of witchcraft, and Reverend Paris wants to shut that talk of witchcraft down when it's about his house. But when the Reverend Hale arrives, he's this sort of learned man. He fairly quickly becomes convinced that there is witchcraft, and Abigail Williams realizes, whether by chance or by natural cunning, a survival instinct, whatever it is, she realizes quite quickly that not only can she deflect attention from her own activities, but she can gain power, she can gain status, she can gain respectability, she can gain a position in the community that otherwise would be absolutely impossible for a woman, particularly a young unmarried woman, if she accuses others of witchcraft. And so Abigail and the other girls, to a lesser extent, basically launch into this crusade of accusing people left, right, and center of being witches. And they start with the most marginalized members of this community. The slave Tituba. They start with Sarah Good, I think, who is this sort of homeless, alcoholic woman, a beggar, etc., etc. And they gradually sort of work their way up to more and more respectable members of the community as the court that has been set up to investigate witchcraft allegations consistently condemns people. It is a system in which, because as Deputy Governor Danforth says, witchcraft is an invisible crime, and so the only people who can bear witness to it are the witch or the victim, and there is no other external evidence, there is no corroborating evidence that can exist. The corollary to that is that there is no evidence that can be given and accepted by the court as legitimate that would prove someone not guilty. And so to be accused is essentially to be convicted. Anyone who confesses to witchcraft will be imprisoned, but anyone who refuses to confess will be, and is found guilty, will be hanged. Eventually, Abigail accuses Elizabeth Proctor, John's wife, of witchcraft. This is really the sort of primary driving force that pulls John into this whole affair. And he essentially comes from the perspective of these accusers are children. There is no doubt on the part of the court. There is only the certainty that those accused are guilty. And it does not matter that some of these people have lived 70 years of being virtuous and upstanding members of the community. To be accused is to be found guilty. And John Proctor finds this system deeply repellent and deeply problematic, as he should. But Abigail accuses Elizabeth out of a sort of interconnected desire, on the one hand, basically to commit judicial murder, to have Elizabeth killed so that Abigail can marry John, and because she believes deeply that John wants Elizabeth gone so that he can marry Abigail. Now, John does not want Elizabeth gone, and when he comes to the court and denounces Abigail, even confessing to their affair, knowing that he will be penalized for the crimes of lechery and adultery, Abigail realizes that he does not, in fact, want her. Her entire calculations have been wrong about John Proctor. And so she ends up accusing him as well. Now, his attempt to sort of undermine her power is undercut when Elizabeth is brought in, and not knowing that John has already confessed to the adultery, she refuses to claim that he and Abigail had an affair. And this breaks the power of John's attempt to disrupt Abigail's operation. When the court convicts John of witchcraft, that is the moment that the Reverend Hale, who had actually, while he sort of kicked off the whole witch hunt thing, over time he gradually becomes less and less comfortable with the casual fanaticism of the court. So eventually, the conviction of John Proctor, whom Reverend Hale believes is a good man, turns him against the court entirely, and he renounces his position as, maybe as a minister, but he at the very least renounces his position as as an affiliate of the court. Then you have this very strange reversal, because on the one hand, for most of the time that he's on stage, Danforth is like, this court's will is going to be carried out absolutely. There can be no doubt. There can be no second guessing. There can be no question about what we are doing. When he then joins Hale and even the Reverend Paris, who seemingly hates John Proctor, everybody basically comes together and asks Elizabeth, who has been imprisoned but her life has been spared because she's pregnant, to get John to confess so that his life will be spared. He will not be hanged, even if he will be imprisoned. Elizabeth refuses to try to persuade her husband to make this what she knows would be a false confession, but John decides to do it until Danforth says that he is going to post the signed confession from John Proctor on the door of the church, at which point John renounces his confession, claiming that he must preserve his name, and he goes to the gallows. And the play ends with Elizabeth, with Hale, I think, basically begging Elizabeth to convince John to change his mind. And she says something to the effect of, "He has his goodness back now. How could I take it away?" So, the Globe performance was really, really good. As I said, they have great actors. Gavin Dre played John Proctor. I think he was really, really, really strong in that role. There was no sort of holding back with the emotional aspects of this character. His frustration, his rage, his resentments, his anger were all played out at volume, which works really, really well for the central character of the play. John Proctor is unquestionably the star of the show. And you got other characters who gave these sort of big performances, very effective performances. Joe Stone Fewings played the Reverend Hale. He thought he was excellent in that role. You get this sort of, he's very, very good at making rhetorically powerful and emotionally impactful speeches. Also, I really enjoyed Dre's Irish accent. He's an Irish actor. I looked it up. And it was not, he wasn't putting on a fake accent. He genuinely is Irish, and I quite enjoyed that because I love Irish accents. Stone Fewing, I think, is English. But like there are these sort of great moments where he goes, because Hale is such an interesting character, because he goes from this sort of self-assuredness, this absolute certainty that there are witches and that what is going on is driven by witchcraft and that cannot be questioned, to this radical doubt over the course of the play. And alongside these very heavy, powerful, emotional roles, you also had very light moments of comedy, which work quite well to break up the action of the play. And probably the best example of this was the character of Giles Corey, played by Howard Ward, who was very, very good in it. There's this sort of strange blend of kind of like bumbling old man, but also someone who is legally very sharp. So it was strange, but the way that he played that character was very, very fun, very, very good. So I said that I have a problem with The Crucible, and I'll try and talk about that very quickly, because it's not central necessarily to the Globe's performance, but I do think it matters in terms of the play itself. So one issue that I have actually was really sort of brought to the forefront of my mind by Kimberly Bellflower's play John Proctor is the Villain, which is in itself a pretty excellent play. One of the points made in that is that John Proctor is terrible to Elizabeth throughout the play, even as he is trying to sort of save her. He is in many ways terrible to her. I mean, he cheats on her. He's verbally and emotionally abusive. He centers himself in all of their conversations, even if sort of her emotions and her reaction is ostensibly the topic of the conversation, he is still centered in that it is her emotions, her reactions about him. And then ultimately, he chooses this debatably pointless death to preserve his name, rather than staying alive for his wife and children. And I say arguably pointless because he has confessed, he has signed a confession. He dies because he does not want that signed confession nailed to the door of the church. Why not? Why is that a step too far if the confession and the signing of the confession were not? And Danforth asks him that, and John Proctor does not give a clear answer. The other element that I find very troubling about The Crucible and the character of John Proctor is he does not grow. He does not improve. And what I mean by that, so Miller clearly structures this as a tragedy, right? You have the Aristotelian steps of a tragedy. In this case, the most sort of relevant ones are hamartia and catharsis. So hamartia, in the 1950s, when Miller wrote this, hamartia was often understood as a tragic flaw, a character deformation, or a character flaw of some kind in a tragic hero that leads to their downfall. Nowadays, we tend to talk about hamartia as a tragic error, a mistake that a character makes, which seems to be a better approximation of what Aristotle means. And then catharsis is the purging of pity and fear. built up over the course of the conflict. John Proctor's tragic flaw is his pride. And the problem is that he is as prideful in the moment of his death as ever he is at the play. He does not learn. He does not have anagnoresis, which is I think is the Greek term for a recognition, right? So in Aristotelian tragedy, there is a moment of recognition in which the tragic hero sees their own flaw, recognizes or sees their own error, recognizes that they are doomed because of their own actions, etc., and comes to terms with that. John Proctor kind of doesn't. So he has an affair with Abigail, which is, I would argue, an act of pride, because he can, right? He has power over her, both as a man and as someone who is older, and he has the power to cheat on his wife. He has that pridefulness. His dealings with Elizabeth throughout much of the play reflect his pride once again, in that he continually demands of her that she forgive him sufficiently. He doesn't put it in those terms exactly, but he's constantly saying, I have done all these things to repent. I have tiptoed around this house for these past 7 months, whatever it is, all of this stuff. And he throws those things in her face. I have done these things. I have earned your forgiveness, etc., etc. And that is a position of pride. It's a position of feeling that he is not receiving something that is his just due. He is pridefully independent of the church, which, of course, in 17th century Puritan New England would not have gone over well with anyone. And even the whole bit with his confession is driven by his pride. He goes to confess that he is a witch because he looks at himself and says, I am not as holy as these other people, my neighbors who are going to be executed. I am not good enough. And that seems paradoxically not like pride, but it is in a way, because it is to single oneself out as the exception. Everyone else is saintly and good. I alone am different. I alone am sullied. That's a moment of pride. It is a declaration of pride that I stand apart from everyone else. I am the only unique individual. And then, of course, ultimately, he decides to recant his confession. And the famous thing is, leave me my name. I will not have it put up on the church door because it is my name and I cannot have another in my life. It is this need to preserve this arbitrary signifier of self. And for that arbitrary signifier of self, he dies for himself, but he also leaves his wife without a husband, his children without a father. Despite Elizabeth's final statement that John has his goodness back, he kind of sucks.